Our last video in this mini-series looked at the background of the 1979 revolution going all the way back to medieval Iran. Now you have the context and a brief history of the key points in the history of Iran that contributed to the revolution. We can look at how the revolution itself developed. In the beginning to mid-1970s, in the years before the 1979 revolution, there was an increase in censorship, terror, torture and Sabak activity. Furthermore, there was by 1977 a true worsening of the economic situation of most Iranians. There was high inflation, mass unemployment and shortages. Jimmy Carter became the new president of the USA and he emphasized his concern over human rights in the world. So the Iranian people began to send letters complaining to the Shah and publish articles in the hope that America would look at their human rights violations and help them. But with the American relationship with Iran being tied to its oil agreements, these calls for help went unanswered. The Iranians complained about political prisoners being held in jails, censorship, the Shah not following the constitution. They complained about his economic and social reforms that left many people displaced and poorer than before. In 1977, there were many different small groups protesting different problems. Lawyers protested against the judicial system. Workers' strikes became common. Students began to protest against their lecturers being fired or taken to prison. Some students even formed a terrorist group to use violence to challenge the Shah. The clerics, likewise, had their own issues with the Pahlavi dynasty. They felt that the Shah was reducing their power. For example, the Shah made schools non-religious and under the charge of secular ministries. Education used to be the responsibility of clerics, so by doing this, many clerics lost their jobs. The clerics were also troubled by the way the Shah was making Iran more Western. He unveiled women. He introduced women into the labour force. He introduced co-ed schools, which meant boys and girls could learn together, but religious clerics saw this as a part of Western influence from sexy films and music. Open drinking and gambling became part of popular culture and was also seen as a bad import from Western culture. Overall, there was a growing feeling of opposition and protest. Once the momentum started to build, it could not be stopped. During this time, there are lots of ideas from different thinkers who talked about change. The works of people like Ayatollah Khomeini and other clerics, and Shariati and other intellectuals were being passed around. Tapes from Khomeini and Shariati were being listened to secretly. In the last video we saw that the clerics had a lot of power in mobilizing people. With Khomeini being critical of the Shah, many clerics began to preach critically of the Shah in mosques. After a build-up the year before of anger and protest, in 1978 the Shah encouraged an article to be published in a big newspaper that attacked Khomeini. He accused Khomeini of just being paid by the British to oppose the Shah and accused him of being tied to the West. An adventurer without faith and tied to the centres of colonialism. A man with a dubious past tied to the more superficial and reactionary colonialists. It called him a fake. Khomeini's students in Qom held a massive sit-in protest which was attacked by the army. 70 students were killed within 2 days. It caused outrage. In February in Tabriz, other clerics and their supporters held demonstrations for those who had been killed. People attacked bank shops and cinemas because these were buildings that represented Western culture. Soon, more and more people began to join the demonstrations. Women would often march in the front of the procession to put the police and army in a difficult position of having to attack women. The demonstrations spread from city to city. The demonstrations might have been in response initially to attacks of Khomeini, but at this time they were not religious in nature. They were more part of angry demonstrations of people tired of a tyrant who mismanaged their country. In Tehran, in September, on Black Friday, a massive protest of over 1 million people was met with an attack and 500 to 900 were killed. The Shah met the turbulence and protest with repression. Khomeini by 1978 grew in popularity. From the initial protest comprised of students, religious opposition, and merchants, soon workers joined under the same banner. The workers' joining was a key turning point. They refused to work and this brought the economy to a standstill. Soldiers began to refuse to fire on crowds and they sympathized with their cause. By January 1979, the Shah left Iran. By February, Khomeini set up a new government and appointed a prime minister himself. Khomeini and a group of intellectuals wrote a new constitution, but Khomeini sneaked in a new element, Velayat-e-Faqih. This was his concept of leadership, which stated that he would be the supreme leader who would guide Iran. He argued that as a learned Muslim Ayatollah, he would represent the authority of the hidden Imam. See our video on Velayat-e Faqih for the full description. But in essence, the new constitution was a trick by Khomeini, which allowed him to set up the clerical regime that we see today, a mullah-archy, a type of dictatorship run by clerics.